I know it's the same shirt from the last week, but it's the same day and I'm recording more videos. Today we will be talking about gain structure. I think most people only concentrate on talking about gain structure inside of the DAW, but I'm trying to give you a bigger picture on every single video. So this time I will talk about all of the stages where we should talk about gain staging because it happens at every single stage. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and let's paint a bigger picture of what gain structure really means. So I have a Reaper session where I'm not trying to show music, I'm trying to make you think of all of the steps that will break whatever you're trying to do. So first of all, this is a discussion that I have had at really high intellectual levels with people that's really smart about the difference, first of all, between saturation and distortion. Distortion is when a waveform is not easy to be recognized as the previous one, or is being distorted so hard that it's not recognizable. Let's think of this analogy as optics. So, with optics, because audio is also physics, what will happen is that when you distort the light or you distort the image, is because the lines are not following as they should. Whenever you look for a distorted effect, you might look for something like this, or you might run into something like this. This is really interesting because if we drag this concept into audio, what will happen with electrical signals is that originally we might have something like a sine wave, a pure tone, that might look something like this. Our sine wave is this one right here, and our distorted wave is this one right here. And the amount of harmonics and the tone of it will sound very different. So audibly, we will think it's different. But in audio and in the listening experience, what we will run into is that when something is distorted, you don't necessarily listen to it as something that's completely different. So if I distort a vocal, I'm not going to think it's a trumpet, but it's going to sound very different. It's going to sound unnatural and not quite like the original one. But distortion as well has made the difference between the kick of the Roland TR-808 into saturating heavily that kick channel, distorting it, thus extending the decay of it and letting us know more of the tonal quality of that kick drum, turning that into a bass. So we are distorting it. It's not the same thing. But saturation, on the other hand, is some steps before distortion where you start to have a couple of harmonics and those add and build upon the original sound, but it's still the original sound. It's having a small timbre change. It's having a small change to it, but it's not so different. It's probably just boosting some of the nice things that it has, or it's hiding some of the defects or flaws that it might have, right? So with this concept, I want to bring you into my big map. So this is one of the things that I usually use when teaching. I like to make diagrams because it's easier to conceptualize and to get a really good grasp of what's going on. So gain structure really happens at every single level. My bass right here is an active bass, right? So that means it has an amp built in. Everywhere where you have an amp section or an input or output fader of some sort is gain staged. So if I have this microphone pushed more or less at 100%, my relationship with the saturation and the distortion of this is going to be made by how hard I'm hitting the strings. Even if I'm playing around this area, is how I am relating with the vibrations that this microphone will pick up, right? And if I want to hit harder my strings, like physically, I could probably bring this a little bit lower down because that way this into the amp won't distort so fast. If I want to play softer and give more of the actual tone of the microphone and pick up more noise, because that's always part of the equation, I could just play a little bit softer and find better places of the string to play so this gets the best of the string without me having to play super hard. And that way I can also hold my stamina for a longer time playing instead of having to pluck ultra hard every single thing. And I'm always relating to this first stage of distortion. The same thing happens with this mic. If I'm pushing a lot of air into this microphone, I will eventually start distorting it. First, the capsule, then other steps that we will look in this diagram, right? So the first relation of gain staging is the instrument itself. Like, how am I stimulating, how am I exciting the instrument so it resonates and gives me that note, that chord that I'm trying to capture and make music with. So I'm just going to add the player with a physical external instrument that could be their own voice, a piano, a Rhodes, a synthesizer. Of course, if we are having some sort of line input instrument, we could go either from a microphone or through a line input. That's only the difference of levels, and that's another video. But we are hitting first the preamp. So the player hits the instrument could distort, because that's why you have certain interpretations of vocals that distort, and that's part of the styles of certain genres when singing, where they use this part of the face as a way of distorting the sound of their own voice. And then I can distort or saturate, remember, first saturate, then distort, the capsule of the microphone. In the case of line instruments, the output of the amplifier itself into the amplifier. So here we have another gain staging where we are always relating ourselves with something that you might have seen already, that's the signal to noise ratio. So we will always be putting attention to this signal to noise ratio that you have probably heard of more than once. So signal to noise ratio, please remember that means that every single thing that's not meant to be captured is going to be considered noise, right? So if someone in the back of the room, because I have my windows open, start screaming, that's going to be noise. The same as if they were playing a song and I like that song, but for this recording in this microphone, that's going to be considered noise. So I want to have a healthy signal level of my own voice against the background noise that could be defined by the quality of the components and many other things. And there's going to be a moment where I push into the saturation point that by textbook, this is what we actually call the headroom itself. The headroom is whenever you start saturating that stage or that system or that part of the chain. That's actually the headroom. From there on, we have a small space or we have some space within the headroom before we actually start distorting, because we are coming in so hard that the cable itself or the system itself cannot handle any more signal, and it will overload and it will distort. And I think this is crucial to keep clear at every single stage. So even before the DAW, we could saturate at 1, 2, 3 stages, even before making voltage into ones and zeros inside our computer. And we can distort at 1, 2, 3 stages at least. Even the player, as I said, you can distort the instrument. So 4, at least we have 4 here. So whenever we hit our audio interface, what we will run into is a preamp first, and then an analog to digital converter. I have shown this in other videos. So for example, this is my voice, and this is the level that I have before actually hitting this 0 dB full scale of my audio interface that doesn't have to match the 0 dB full scale of my mixer inside my DAW. These two aren't necessarily at the same place. That's super strange. I know it's super strange, but it's important to know every single difference. As you can see here, I have peaked at least. I'm not sure if I have distorted, but this is going through my output 5 in my audio interface. So this should be something that whoever was listening to the mix 1 in my output 5 would have listened to. Another thing is that most of these meterings, some DAWs and some developers, what they do is they tell you that this is a 0 dB full scale, but it's actually 3 or 6 dBs before an actual 0 dB full scale, because that's Sadly, that's necessary by design because people keep on being stubborn and just pushing the levels and working in red. So if you're working and all of your mixer is in the reds and you're not listening to distortion, the designers and the audio engineers are the geniuses, I promise, because you think nothing is going wrong and nothing will happen. So this is the level of my audio to digital converter, and this is another stage that I have right here. So we have 5 stages. Then our track input inside my DAW is strange in the sense that if I open a new track and I just set up the input of this track to my track 5 where my voice is coming in, again, this level, as you can see, is minus 1.3, but this one is close enough, but I don't have the exact number of this one, right? They are close enough. So even if I open a track and assign it to my input 5 and monitor or see the place where my fader is going, I can see that this is pretty close, but it's not exactly covering the same amount of the meter itself. Like it's not matching up. So the input of the DAW could be something tricky. Some DAWs, what they will do is you will have the option to look at the pre-fader track metering when you're recording. That way, if I lower this fader, I can still see how I'm going into my DAW. I know DAWs, most of the DAWs won't actually distort and won't saturate just because you're hitting 1. See, even if I push it up, it's not changing the level because this is my voice. But if I keep it down and I have this option on and I don't know it's on, what will happen is that some DAWs will match the position of my fader with this metering. In this case, this feature in Reaper is for playback, not for recording. I might be missing something, but I think in Reaper, we can't actually change when something is armed what kind of metering we are looking at. So for Reaper people, this is probably not an issue unless I'm missing something. Please let me know in the comments. But I know on Pro Tools it is. I know on Ableton Live it isn't. So please double check this in your DAW. So the thing is that after we go into a track inside of the DAW, there is no stage of distortion right here. So these first big steps, we have 5, right? Can we agree on that? Up to here, we have 5 stages. In the track input, there is absolutely no saturation or distortion. But from there, we go into the effects, right? Our built-in effects that we will use for a lot of things. So stock plugins on most DAWs, as far as I know, or on every DAW, as far as I know, won't be able to clip because they are using either 32-bit float, and remember that the floating point is what makes the extra headroom available because it recalculates the mantissa. But I don't understand why people are fighting or are trying to be as close as possible to the red. If we are working with 24-bit dynamic range, we have 144 dBs of dynamic range. This is super loud. Like you have no idea how crazy loud that is. The whole problem is that we're always fighting with the dynamic range of stuff, so everything can be played back in a really small device with low power and with low amp output. And that's why we are trying to reduce the dynamic range using stuff like compression, not because we necessarily need things louder. We can get things as loud as we can because it's 2024. Loudness is not a priority, I promise. So most of the stock plugins, whenever you're trying to use your SlickEQ or your Tukan plugins or your stock plugins of your DAW of choice, these won't clip or distort. They usually won't. If you know of any plugin that does that stock, please let me know. I like to keep myself informed. But the issue is when we have third-party plugins that they have everything set up at different levels. So maybe you're working with something that's using VU meters because someone told you that VU meters will make you sound great because they display properly the sound. I'm sorry to say that they are really low and sensible, and they are really high end, not sensible and not showing a lot of it. And that takes you into a certain way of sounding, but it's not necessarily the best for every project. So if I want to double check what's the VU meter equivalency for this, because as I said, we have an input and an output of a different plugin, not every developer has to program their plugin exactly the same way. And this makes it hard. And that's why you have to know your plugins inside out. Like your basic 5 to 10 plugins, you have to know them inside out. If I push all the way into this one, I need to know that if I hit this, is this distorting or is it not? My suggestion is for you to play only a sine wave. And for example, here I'm going out through this dirty tape track, right? And I can just drag an oscilloscope and see that the signal is actually getting squared off. So this plugin is actually clipping the signal. I can clip the input of the plugin. Since I am not clipping the output, I could try it both ways. I could lower the output and keep on doing this, and I can almost square off the wave. But what if I'm not clipping the input, but I'm clipping the output? Does it behave the same way? It doesn't. So it's crazy because gain staging also happens in plugins. Like there's a reason why plugins are plugins and why every developer will simply do whatever they want. And they are not forced or they are not obligated in any way to do what every other developer is doing. So if I try that same thing with PSP Vintage Warmer, what I will run into is that I don't have any input like knob right here. What I can do is I can add a transparent knob, a really completely transparent gain knob right here that I can use to just push the level, and I'm hitting this 0 dB full scale because I know that how this one is calibrated. I will talk about it, but I'm going to try to clip the input or to push the input. So I'm going to go really hard into it, like go 30 dBs, and you can see that this is not squaring off the wave. It simply isn't. Even though I went really, really hard on it, like it's not getting squared. Why? Because probably this design is going to try and make some sort of soft clipping where you don't square off the wave. So soft clipping behaves more like saturation instead of distortion. But what if I lower the input and I max out the output? I'm going to push a little bit harder in. And again, this plugin is not squaring off the wave. So I have to know which plugins I can soft clip in the output or the input, or which ones I really shouldn't care too much about this, or if that's a resource that I want to have available whenever I'm just using a plugin and I want to have that extra soft clipping texture to it. This one has a built-in really, really nice sounding design, so it doesn't need that extra thing. And most of the times, if you're doing some proper audio, you won't be dealing with a session that's always in the red. Like you shouldn't need to. On the other hand, if we keep on digging into the plugin realm, we will see that I'm sending into both tracks a signal at minus 18.1. And the VU meters of these two won't behave the same because they are not calibrated at the same level. Remember that in physical, you could make a small adjustment of the VU meters to be at a certain level, giving you a specific information. The recommendation overall is that 0 VU meters should be close or matching at minus 18 dB full scale, but this is not regulated, so developers are not forced in any way to comply with this suggestion because it's just a suggestion. So we could all work in a safe level. If I turn on both of these plugins, you will see that the needles of the input, in this case pre, this one actually matches 0 dB full scale. 0 VUs actually match that input that was minus 18 dB full scale, but this one in the input doesn't. So you have to go under the hood and check the options and see if there is a way to change that value, or find where is it expecting to mark 0 dB, or where is it expecting to mark 0 VUs. In this case of the dirty tape by Softtube, what will happen is that I already have this one that's adding 8.5 dBs, and now the output is matching, but as you can see, the input isn't matching still. So I would have to find a way to change the input until it actually matches that, or find a way to drive it, see? And since I'm not sure if this is given on dBs, because the proportion is not working. Like if I go 6 number here, is not the same movement as 6 number here. 6 number here is moving that needle all the way up to 10, and 6 here is not moving it barely. So probably this is a much bigger movement in that stage, and that's something to consider when you're trying to do gain staging. I love this topic. I get so excited because there's so much to unpack. So you have to look into your plugins. If you have some analog emulations, they will probably have some level, some dB full scale, where they will start saturating the signal and they will eventually distort it and clip it. But since they are completely analog versions that are expecting transformers and amps that color the sound, it's a very specific phenomenon, right? On the other hand, the PSP one, if I go here on the back and I go into plugin settings, I can change the VU reference level that's marked right now at 0-18 dB full scale. So check those plugins that have some sort of VU metering at hand or at sight, because they might be doing something really strange. And I would highly suggest for you to start making some equal gain default presets, because whenever I start this plugin, you can see how my signal is already increasing from -18 all the way up to -15, right? Because I have this knob right here. I'm going to restart this one, and I'm still getting a couple of cents of decimals that could be a bit more. So I'm just going to really match it. That way I'm going to save that as my default. So whenever I open the plugin, it's only adding its color and I'm not pushing it in any single way. And I have my levels properly set. So this step in between inside of the DAW, again, we have no saturation or distortion available. Processing, it's dependent on every single plugin that you use. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. So here we have another stage. From there, we can handle the level with our faders. Please use your faders more. People probably aren't using them enough, because that's how we are going to be relating ourselves with our master track. Another thing is that the summing of the mixer of every DAW usually doesn't behave exactly the same as the sum in the stereo out master track. So more often than not, I have seen that these behave in 32-bit floating point or 64. In the case of Reaper, you can change this track mixing depth from 64 all the way down to 8-bit integer. But you can change the way the mix down or the summing inside of the mixer section. It's a separate part of how you're summing your signals. And probably this will have either some extra space above 0. Some DAWs actually give you a small soft clipping signal that is not distorting, but it's barely soft clipping, very, very soft clipping. And you still have 300 dBs above this. Like, it's crazy. But the one that's not going to be condoning any bad practices is the stereo out. Usually, when you hit the zero right here, this is actually clipping the signal. So be really careful with that one. On some DAWs, this fader is before the FX, and some DAWs, this fader is after the FX. So do check it. How can you check it? Well, set any metering plugin as an FX, move the fader, and if this moves, this is going into the plugins. If it's not, then it's going after the plugins. As you can see right here, I have a signal, a small tone just flowing there. Of course, every single plugin applies. Virtual instruments, I will make a video just on virtual instruments and how to record them and levels. So you're getting the most out of it, and you always have some extra space to do whatever moves you want to make. So probably here we have one last stage at the stereo out. That's down here. But from there, we are going again from this digital to analog converter that has its own saturation and clipping point into our speakers or headphones that can also distort. And if we want to include again the human in the equation, our ears can also distort because we are listening at very loud levels. Gain structure is probably a very commonly asked topic, but I think we have to look at it, really dissect it step by step. I hope you find this video useful. It's a topic I love, and I think it's really important to present it like this. Take a screenshot of this. I don't care. Like, if you use it on social media, please just give me credit. You can find me everywhere. The link is in the description. But a really important conclusion of this is that the DAW itself doesn't have headroom because it doesn't have a saturation point, because we go from minus 160 all the way to 0 full scale. That's instantly clipping the signal. So we go from noise into distortion. And since headroom, by definition, is the saturation point, and we never cross it, we have no headroom in our DAWs. We introduce the headroom by using specific plugins that will react harmonically in different ways at different levels within our session. So find those plugins that you have for that and adjust them properly. Like, just build your own structure. I will make an interesting video on that as well. If you'd like to support my work, I'm uploading videos every single week. You can find links in the description that are affiliate links for Plugin Boutique. You can find also a Buy Me a Coffee link. You can join the Reaper discussion group on Discord that I will also link in the description. And if you want any one-on-one sessions, you can also just look me up on social media or through the Reaper Discord, and we can discuss of any mixing, mastering services, lessons, or whatsoever. So we can discuss whatever you're stuck in at this moment. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. And do all of those things that people on YouTube say. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and thanks for listening.